Ladies and gentlemen, our program will now begin. Please join me in welcoming the CEO of the Churchill Club, Karen Tucker.
Thank you so much. You're so kind, and I'm happy to welcome you tonight. Today is Data Privacy Day 2020, and we're gathered to talk about the effects of privacy regulation and privacy thinking on the business model. We've entered, as we've called it, the new era of privacy. As always, some big thanks are in order to special people and companies who, like Churchill Club, value thoughtful conversations that look at both opportunities and challenges for the times ahead. Kamini, Ramani, and Camille Gran at Mayfield, Michael Morgan at McDermott, Rehan, Jalil, and Eric Andrews at SECURITI.ai, Jim Dempsey at Berkeley Law, Mary Casares at First Republic Bank, and Shane Lunsford of the Lending Club all played an important role in the formation of this discussion, from weighing in on initial content to framing to the speaker set to providing the space and amenities that's here for us tonight. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. I'm thinking that our new guests in the audience might like just a brief introduction to Churchill Club. We're in our 35th year as an independent, nonprofit thought leadership forum. We're dedicated to strengthening innovation, economic growth, and social good. In our topic-centric conversations, we work hard to get at what's new, next, not widely known, that is, under-discussed insights and possible future states based on the trends that we are seeing today. We aim our programming at active and dynamic leaders and professionals across the innovation ecosystem. Just like the people here in this room, we generally try to keep the content at a high level of pre-existing knowledge, and so that's how we do it, to try to think about some of the developments in stride. Our very first speaker back in 1985 was Bob Noyce, who was then the CEO of Intel. A couple other notes here. The hashtag for tonight is Churchill Club, and you can also use Privacy Aware, which is the Data Privacy Day hashtag, and there are other Twitter codes in the program that you might be interested in looking up as well. It's time to mention or to welcome a friend of the stage who is one of the nation's top lawyers in global privacy and cybersecurity at McDermott, Will & Emery. His name is Michael McDermott, and he will bring up our panel. Welcome, Mike. Michael Morgan, sorry. I knew I was going to do that. I actually knew I was going to do that. Mike Morgan McDermott. Here.
Thank you, Karen. And thank you to the Churchill Club for making this event possible. On behalf of McDermott, Will & Emery, we're thrilled to help sponsor this event. We are here to talk about data privacy. As everybody knows, data privacy has become such a hot topic with things like the European Union's General Data Protection Regulation, California's Consumer Privacy Act. You might think that privacy is relatively new, but California has had a constitutional privacy right for many, many decades. And yet, privacy is on the agenda like it has never been before. Now, we are not here to talk about compliance. We're here to talk about what's new, what's next, and we have a terrific panel for you. We've got Jim Dempsey from the Berkeley Center. We've got Jim Steyer from Common Sense Media, and we've got Rehan Jalil from SECURITI.ai, who I've had the privilege of speaking with maybe 20 or 30 times. But it is a terrific panel, and would like to hand it over to Pui-Wing Tang. I'm sorry. Okay, here you go. Take it away.
Thank you. So I guess we will all sit and feel free. So let me do a slightly longer introduction of these fine gentlemen, and then we'll kick off our discussion. We'll start with the man closest to me, Jim Dempsey, who is the executive director of the Berkeley Center for Law and Technology. Jim has been an expert on privacy and internet policy for 3 decades. He was previously at the Center for Democracy and Tech, among other places, and has advised policymakers, lawmakers, and others. Rehan Jalil, the CEO of a San Jose startup, SECURITI.ai, which works on technology for data governance. I hope I got that description right. Your company just announced a new round of funding today,
That's
$50
right.
million. Congratulations, great timing.
Thank you so much.
Rehan was previously at Symantec, Blue Coat, and other tech startups. And then, of course, last but not least, Jim Steyer, the CEO of Common Sense Media, which is a crucial resource for parents like myself, since it delves into all matters around media, tech, and children's issues. He is the author of Talking Back to Facebook and The Other Parent, the inside story of the media's effect on our children. And I understand he has a new book coming out talking about which side of history technology will be on in the future and its effect on all of us. And now we will kick off our discussion, the new era of privacy. Obviously, we've seen a lot of movement in privacy legislation over the last couple of years. GDPR and CCPA, I think, will be mentioned frequently in our discussion, GDPR being what Europe adopted in 2018, and CCPA, which just went into effect here on January 1st. So with that, I guess the first question is, are we really in a new era of privacy because of this privacy legislation? I think you guys have some interesting views on that. I'm going to kick it off with Jim Steyer.
Okay. Yes, the answer is yes. I think we are definitely in a new era of privacy. I mean, just to trace it back, Talking Back to Facebook came out in 2012. Facebook tried to block the publication of the book, which is almost absurd on its face. But because they were concerned about what the content of the book was, most of which was not about Facebook, by the way, but which was about the impact of technology, social media writ large, on the social, emotional, and cognitive development of children. I wrote one chapter in the book about privacy. And I recall at that time, because in both writing the book, but also dealing with a lot of the policy deal with, people have basically said, I'm sorry, privacy is passé. Remember Zuckerberg at that point was saying, it's a new social norms. Privacy doesn't matter anymore. I'm a con law professor at Stanford for the last 30 years, so it's not just a right in the California Constitution, but privacy is a fundamental right under the US Constitution. But 2012, people were saying privacy's done with, it's gone. And now we're sitting here in 2020, Rehan is building an incredible new company to let both businesses and consumers deal with the new privacy reality. And even my teenage and now 20-something children agree that privacy is an issue, which 5 years ago they didn't. So I think we are in an extraordinary new era, and I think we've just begun to see the changes. I think the winds are at our back, meaning consumers, kids, families, companies that are pro-privacy. And I think there's been a huge sea change in the last 2 years. Phenomenal sea change, and it's just begun.
Jim,
I
Rehan,
think
go ahead.
The question is, why is this a new era? So if you go back a few decades, I think your life was pretty private. Like, who was tracking you? There was no Facebook, there was no social media, there was no internet. So you're pretty private. You knew your neighbors, and it was, unless the government was watching you or the Secret Service was watching you, it's pretty private. You turn it around, this, as Jim calls it, like surveillance capitalism, right? Where like any company which has a small cookie dropped on you, which you don't even know, is tracking you. And any service that you're trying to, in your best of the hearts, you're trying to use as a free service, or even sometimes paid services, they're all tracking you. So it's a new era because the world has shifted that every step that you take, you're being tracked. You can easily go back and look at Google, and I welcome you actually to look at. You can open a Google console, and you can search back 3 years back, and you can tell exactly where you were, what path you took, or which road you took, which hotel did you went to, how long did you spend, and they have the data.
Yeah.
Right? So that's why it's new era. It's an action versus reaction that's actually there. And now the question is are we solving it the right way? Is the legislation solving it the right way? Is it the right thing? People are making attempts at it. There's never a straight line. and you're going to hear that more. But it is, okay, a step forward. This legislation stuff, not perfect, but step forward to it. On the other hand, of course, it's a new era because companies are realizing that it is not about just following the regulation. It's a trust-building exercise. Can you build trust? And you're going to talk about like which companies are on this side of the equation and which I still think they don't need to care about this thing. And I think time is going to tell how they're going to be penalized along the way. And new models will emerge from who owns the data. I think it's a very, very interesting topic. It is a new era for that reason.
Jim Dempsey.
Yeah, well, clearly it's a new era. The question is it a new era moving in a worse direction or in a better direction? And I think, to be honest, you would have to say, well, both are happening simultaneously, that in some ways things are getting better and in some ways they're getting worse. So, it's like Charles Dickens, the best of times, the worst of times. Just riffing for a second on trust, we've been talking about trust for a long time, actually. I mean, I've been working on privacy now for, 20, 30 years. And trust was always the issue, trust in companies. But these services are so compelling. It doesn't matter whether you trust the company or not, you're going to use it because it's so cool, it's so immediate, and to some extent it's so, now we've sort of defined it as being sort of essential to our lives. So and again, we're going in both directions simultaneously. Yesterday, Cisco issued a report, the third year in a row they've done this, where they tried to put an ROI on privacy. And it was sort of interesting that they actually found that companies were experiencing, again, to the extent you can measure it, I'm not quite sure about the metrics here, but Cisco claims, and pretty good methodology, 2x return on investment for privacy efforts in terms of value to the business. Leave aside value to the consumer, value to the business in terms of trust, in terms of some reduced costs, in terms of better operations, in terms of better relationships with partners, in terms of better breach response when they do lose the data. So again, I think as we disaggregate this, as you push us a little harder here in the questioning and the questions from the audience, because I'm sure there's a lot of very knowledgeable people in the audience, is it law? Is it technology? Is it the sort of business model aside from the technology? I think there are massive changes occurring in all three. Honestly, I'm most skeptical, being a lawyer, I'm most skeptical of the law. I'm just not sure that we've even got the right concept of privacy in our laws.
Well, we'll take each of those in turn as we go down this panel. Well, you guys talk about what we're seeing as some of this is an opportunity, but isn't it also a challenge that as these laws have passed and they give people more of a right around privacy, that we're seeing these companies in particular face a lot of challenges around dealing with this. I'm interested in what sort of responses you're
my response is I have zero sympathy for any of the companies whatsoever. They had a free pass for the last 20 years, basically, and they screwed people left and right, and the government sat there and did nothing about it. So we've had 20 years of basically ignoring, by the way, I will give you my Poli-Sci 101 lecture in 30 seconds. Privacy is a fundamental right under the US Constitution. There are only 3 fundamental rights under the US Constitution. It was eviscerated by any number of tech companies over the last 20 years while the federal government sat on their hands and did nothing other than pass Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, which is not a privacy issue, but which gave them a safe harbor for being held responsible for any of the content on their platforms. So you've seen this extraordinary, by the way, technological revolution, which has brought many great benefits to our lives, no question. But it was at the cost of eviscerating privacy norms and privacy rights for everybody in this room, and quite frankly, for citizens all around the globe. So this is a welcome change to me. And to me, the future is and by the way, the CCPA, which Common Sense Media drafted and wrote and then negotiated with a number of the largest tech companies, is an imperfect law. So I agree with Jim Dempsey that the law has not caught up. And right now we're in the middle of looking at laws in California that would strengthen the CCPA, which just went into effect. Because, for example, there's no coverage of data use. There is in GDPR. But by the way, we have a cheat sheet for everybody if you in your packets there about what CCPA says and what GDPR says. It's inside the book. But the truth is, the law is way behind where social norms are. But the biggest thing to me I will come back to is, if we'd had this talk 3 years ago, I would say most of the people in the audience would say, you know, privacy, it's almost a thing of the past. And I don't think that's true anymore. And Rehan's building a business that I think has been a phenomenally successful business around helping businesses respect people's privacy and consumers accessing their privacy rights. So I think it's mostly an opportunity, and the challenges for companies are to act responsibly. And so what? They should. They're coining money on my data and your data.
Rehan?
Yeah, I think a couple of things. I think I'm going to pick up on the thread from there is that there are certain services where people, it's hard for them to live. And to your point, you know, ask somebody to get off Facebook, and you're like, okay, it's very hard. But frankly, that's not the only company. If you think these are only few companies doing it, we're completely misguided. You would go to smallest of companies, and I've seen it firsthand. They will have people's worth, like hundreds of millions of people's worth of data, and people don't even know, right? And I didn't even subscribe to their service. And there is a whole marketplace of selling and buying data. A report came out just yesterday. Avast, which is like a cybersecurity company, gives you free antivirus. People are like, free antivirus. On the back end, there's a whole marketplace of selling data behind you, right? And which means every click, everything that you do, every site that you go to, I'm not sure I'm supposed to say it, but every porn site people go to, yeah, it's all tracked. What are you searching on those sites, right? And it's sold. I mean, that is something which is, I think, you have to look at. Another example I'll give you is that why it is actually important. Sometimes, you remember the Face app scandal? Mm-hmm. Yeah, you would put your pictures, you give access to you. They will ask to give access to your folder with all the pictures and the videos, and they'll make you look like 10 years older. And people somehow felt good about it. I don't know why. But even if they did, they didn't realize that they were signing off the rights of all the pictures to them. Company in Russia, by the way, right? They can use it for anything. Now, I think, so the point really being is that certain companies are certainly misusing that without even me knowing, and that's where I think the laws are the only ways to protect it. There is no other way. Now, question really is, there are certain companies which are looking at this model and saying, like, why am I being left behind? And these are sometimes retailers, and these are like not their business model, but they're also trying to do it, and now the law is caught up. And their biggest issue is that if you think about some largest of the hotel chains and retailers and all, they have tens of thousands of servers on the back end. Yeah. They don't know where the data is. If somebody shows up and says, go delete my data, if they have to comply, they generally don't know where it is. Generally, they don't know where it is. And with what they have done so far is that manually they kind of get some check marks with consulting firms and all that. Now they really have to comply. Then they have to go figure where this copies of data is, generally delete it, keep it clean, so if the breach happens, they're not under the gun. I think the biggest challenge is actually that. If privacy is a human right, how do companies generally comply and give rights to people on the data in the limited time that they have? And if the breach happens, how do they notify? And that's not easy. Manually, it's not possible. I think the tech has to help along the way. The tech has to evolve along the way. And that's a responsibility and opportunity for Silicon Valley and many other companies out there.
And Pui-Wing, just let me say one thing, which is what Rehan just said about privacy being a human right is a fundamentally important point for all of us to take home, because it is. And if it's seen that way, like it used to be, then that will dramatically shift the way all of us view that. And most of all, how our kids and our grandkids view it. And so I think the idea of privacy as a human right is an incredibly important concept for the broader discussion. Sorry about that interruption.
No, that's good. That's good. I want to try to introduce two what I see as related points. One of which is just the sheer complexity of this ecosystem, of this sort of technological world, which is, to me, what makes solving the privacy problem is so difficult because you just have companies that the average consumer never heard of, or you have data flows that are a surprise to individuals when they find out about it. The Avast thing, for example, you thought you were getting an antivirus software security program, and in fact, you were getting that plus a tracker, which then tied into this broader transfer and flow of data. So complexity, Bruce Schneier says that complexity is the enemy of security. Well, complexity is also in many ways the enemy of privacy. Now, one way where there's been amazing progress actually, and good progress, and this is my Tale of Two Cities theme, is in location-based services and the cell phones and the apps. And now with iOS and Android, and now for a couple years, and it's gotten better with iOS 13, the app, at the moment you download you install the app, you get that permission. Now, why do you get that permission? You got that permission request because of a decision that was made by Apple and Google in not allowing the data to be pulled from the operating system, the GPS data to be pulled. That was a decision that the companies made, and you can say never, always, or when in use. And just the other day, there was a study out showing that background location data collection, that is when the app is not in use, but obviously many of them collect even when not in use, that background collection has gone down 68%. Foreground conclusion, which is when you're using it, has even gone down 24%, so when it's not necessary. Those controls are usable. They are given you when you need them. You can go into your phone. You can easily look at the entire, if you haven't done this, please do so, at the entire list of apps you have and see, is it never, always, or only when in use. That's progress. Yeah, that's good. I don't know that any law actually forced people to do that.
Okay, but we were involved in that. So that did not just happen by chance. So first of all, I agree that it's really good, Jim, that you can do that now with the location, right? Do you think that just happened out of the goodness of Eric Schmidt's heart? Eric Schmidt, who I quoted in my book, saying, really, if you have a problem with privacy, all you have to do is change your identity. Wow. Literally, you want me to go down the list of comments by the great titans of Silicon Valley in the late, during the era of 2006 to 2014? Here's what happened. You think Google did that out of the goodness of their heart? I have an iceberg to sell you that we can put in Arizona if you believe that. No, what happened was Apple, which is a different business model from Google, worked with us and a couple of other, and by the way, had a DNA with some degree of social responsibility in it, and worked with us and a couple of other folks behind the scenes and realized, because we were going after Foursquare and some of the original tracking apps at the time. And first under Steve and really under Tim and all the guys who run Apple now, they understood that A, it didn't affect their business model that much, and B, it was the right thing to do. Google only did it because Apple did it. Google has not done, I can't think of one proactive thing they've done protecting anybody in this room's privacy except in response to what their biggest competitors did and their very acute perception of what the public sentiment is. So that didn't just come out of the goodness of their heart. That came out of pressure at that time from, Common Sense is a really large nonprofit, but we're tiny in comparison to who these guys are. But they're doing it because they felt pressure.
And the interesting thing is, though, right, that they did it not because a law required them to do it.
True, but Google did it only because Apple did it. It's the same way Google opposed us every step of the way. By the way, they're probably I like the folks who run Google a lot, work with them a fair amount. They're probably some of their colleagues here tonight. They completely opposed the CCPA when we were doing it. They worked behind the scenes largely through the tech lobbyists on this. They did. But when it became clear that we had a majority of people that were going to vote for it in the legislature, they changed their position on it. So, but going back to the fundamental point here, much of this is because of business model. an Apple.
Let's talk about that.
Well, because Apple's
let's talk
business
about
model
that.
is not based on hoovering up your data and then selling it to advertisers. But if you look at the two biggest companies, obviously, are Facebook and Google. Their business model, which Shoshana Zuboff calls surveillance capitalism, and many other companies, based on you taking your data, doing it in an incredibly sophisticated way, and then selling it to advertisers for massive profit.
I was with you right up until you said selling it to advertisers. And here's my problem with the CCPA. Facebook does not sell your data.
Well, that's what they say.
No, I mean, why would they sell your data? Your data is their most valuable asset. They place ads, they deliver ads, but they don't sell your data. Google, I think, says they don't sell your data. Amazon, I looked just today, Amazon says we don't sell data. We're not covered by the do not sell provision of the CCPA.
Right.
I just think that this notion of they're selling your data, honestly, Jim, I just think it's the
Let's talk about those companies'
wrong
business
word
models.
to use here.
Let's talk a little bit
think
about.
they
They monetize it, they make money off it, they've been minting money off of it, I agree with you there, but sell, CCPA went down the do not sell route.
I know.
And some of the very biggest ones are saying today, we don't sell.
And they're going to lose on that, by the way.
Well,
I actually think they're going to
these
lose.
big companies and whether actually their business models will change at all with CCPA and GDPR, and whether, outside of the big companies, how we will see other business models evolve and how we will see technology evolve. Rehan.
So, for instance, if let's say, again, this is in the land of the unknown. So you have to kind of project yourself there. And it's going to happen perhaps with time. And it's going to happen not just because of only the law. It's going to happen because people know it's their right. And when that happens, and how that happens, we can debate. And maybe, Hollywood makes a movie, all of a sudden everyone cares about their privacy, all of a sudden, right? And if that happens, and if people start exercising their rights, and if technology supports it, then you can have a model where it is not like Google and Facebook, which have consolidated data, argue the word, whether it's sell, lease, lend in an ominous fashion, but they make money off it. Let's argue they don't sell it, but they can give it all the information, you can serve this ad to me with all my identity, my location, whatever name you want to use. So they're doing that. But if that right goes to the consumer and they can say, no, I can delete it, I can stop you from doing it, you cannot collect it, then power kind of maybe distributes along the way. And if that happens again, then maybe there is a model in which you have to share. And the people who own the data, somehow they have a direct benefit. I'll give you a simple example. We're a company where we actually have to advertise to people to create awareness. The amount of money that you actually pay to simply get a click on your ad is like $1,000 per lead or $500 per lead. And the person who I'm actually going to try to attract to just look at something has no benefit to it, except that maybe awareness. All the money goes to LinkedIn, it goes to Facebook, it goes somewhere else.
Right.
I would rather actually pay all that money to the person I'm trying to attract, if their model exists. Because I know there's an incentive there for them to actually just look at what actually there's just education. I think that there is absolutely, the world may look like we're different. If it's my data, maybe the benefit has to come to the consumer. There are a lot of ifs in there, but I think it's going to evolve to that direction.
And by the way, to that effect, so last year, we drafted legislation called, I used to call it Show Me the Money, from the great movie that some of you may remember. But we called it You Are the Product. And we drafted it with Jaron Lanier and a few really smart people over in Berkeley. And Gavin Newsom, the governor, called it the data dividend. And the idea was, it's your data. By the way, that's one of the fundamental things that is critically important. Whose data is it? My data or their data? It's mine. It's my personal information. And so we have not gotten very far with this yet, because it's a really complicated context. And Gavin announced it in the State of the State in his first, saying there's going to be a data dividend. But he didn't know what he meant more than there's going to be a data dividend. And we're still trying to figure out how it would be workable, because it's a very complex process. But the idea is, it is our data, and if it's going to be sold, or however we want to we can phrase it semantically, it's going to be monetized by large companies, then you should get a piece of the action. Their issues have to do with equity. It's very complicated. But I think that over the next 5 years, Pui-Wing, this is where this is going to go. There's going to be a really interesting discussion economically about whose data is it and who should be compensated for it. And it's too hard to write legislation right now about it. I know because we've been trying to, Omar knows, it's very complicated to think about all the different permutations of the law. But I think that's where this may go, because it is my data and it is being monetized for a lot of money. And so what portion of that do I get?
So if we had to blue sky, how would that affect Silicon Valley? How would that affect, the services that we use today? I mean,
I'm a little skeptical at the ownership approach, because a number of years ago, the Facebook privacy policy said, you, the Facebook user, own your data. By using our service, you hereby give us a worldwide, royalty-free, irrevocable license to use your data as we wish. So, okay, I own it, but now I've just given you a license, and I've licensed you, and I've licensed 300 other people. In a way, to me, this is the problem with the notice and consent model of privacy, which has dominated our whole approach to privacy for 30 years now. CCPA is opt-out. Most companies had already adopted opt-out years ago. The ad industry had adopted opt-out, very hard to use. I was just looking over the last couple days at some of the web pages, really hard to use on some of them still under CCPA. I went to Amazon, and I love Amazon, but you go to the bottom of the page, there you encounter 32 links to different things. You keep scrolling, there are 42 more links. You finally come to privacy notice. You click on that. You get a 6-page privacy notice, which has a link to the CCPA notice, which is 2 pages long. And then, of course, you read that they say we don't sell your information. Then you go to, well, OK, let me delete my information, which is the other right I have. And that was fascinating because, obviously, they track your purchases. And just let me read you the language here, if I can quickly get it. I went and I deleted, or thought I was deleting my, my search history. And it says, Amazon can keep your browsing history hidden. When you turn your browsing history off, we will not show items you click on or searches you make from. Well, that doesn't say they're not keeping it. They're saying they're just not showing it to you. And also it says searches you make from this device, meaning if you log in to your Amazon account from another device, you then have to go through the whole process all over again. And again, we click I accept. Now, there's a California privacy law. Jim may have worked on this. Ed Tech.
We wrote that law.
That's the one privacy law that I know of that is not a notice and consent law.
Correct.
This is a law that says anybody developing an ed tech app for K2 through 12, whatever data you collect, you can use only for purposes of providing the ed tech service. There's no parental consent. No parental consent. Which means parents can't say, yes, share it.
Correct.
It comes in, it's like Roach Motel. The data goes in and it doesn't go out. It's not a consent-based model. It's not even a notice model because after all, what did the kids know and would the permission even get home?
Let me tell you why that happened. The reason that happened was because we ambushed the industry at the time, and they didn't know we were going to do that. And the head of the Senate, Darrell Steinberg, who's now the mayor of Sacramento, and a very thoughtful person who's done one of the most effective jobs of any public official I've ever seen, pushed the law through with us before the industry realized what we were doing. And it was also only about ed tech products and student privacy, so people were less concerned. We weren't going after the holy grail, which is your and my privacy.
But everything else is this notice and consent approach.
But for now,
Which we got to move beyond.
Because I think where we're going to go over the next 10 years is where we should go, which would be, well, two things. One, people like Rehan are going to build some amazing companies. They're going to help everybody actually protect their own privacy rights and help companies become in compliance with that. But the second thing is, I think we'll move to an opt-in standard at some point, which is the standard that it should be. It's not like when you write a law, you get to just write the law that Jim Steyer and Rehan Jalil want. You have to negotiate that with large, multi-trillion-dollar companies who have a big stake in the game. And so the notice and consent law is essentially a legislative compromise at this point about trying to, the perfect is the enemy of the good. You were saying the perfect is the enemy of the good. We knew that on CCPA. It was maybe 75% of what we wanted. But 75% is better than 0, which is where we were starting.
So the opt-in model that you think that
that's where I think we should go.
Is that the model that ultimately then ends up limiting collection of data and not just?
Well, and it goes to Jim's point, which means you can only use the data for the purpose. People do need to use the data. The data is very valuable for the purpose that the business wants to use it for. The question is, can you sell it to other people or monetize it in all sorts of other different ways? And I am not worried that any of the large Silicon Valley companies are going to go out of business. They'll just figure out how to deal with it and continue to grow.
Till we get to the perfect, which I do agree, I think with, if you actually narrow it, that just use for the services that you're offering, I think I do agree with that. Till we get there, which is perfect, I would say. I think even today, the CCPA, in the example that Jim gave, is if you want to, regardless of what you signed, if you now actually, if you're a California resident, you have a right. You can go say, go delete my data.
Right.
And the companies, some of them are making it easy. You can go and ask for it, and some are making it very difficult to exactly to the point.
Right.
But I think I can bet you on that. There is going to be technologies, not too far out in the future, like Yelp, that you can go and find how to delete my data. And those technologies will actually help you discover how do you delete your data. And if you trust them, if they're trustworthy, then you'll give a little bit more control to them, and they will delete it for you. Because humans, inherently, we are all lazy. I mean, we're not going to go figure it out, all these clicks. But I can give it access to a bot, which perhaps can do it for me, right? Of course, it's a technology I'm using. And I think that will enable, at a mass level, that if I'm asking you to delete my data or restrict the usage, then you have to do it, if I'm a California resident.
Today, when I did one delete my data, and I actually had to, of course, click saying I'm not a bot.
Yeah, that's different. I didn't mean that bot that way. So you're right. That you actually have to make sure, and bot may be a very, I would say, overloaded term. Let's say a technology. That actually helps you do it, because you can actually have technology which helps you give it access to your email and give it access to these things, and you can actually facilitate that. How that happens, I can bet you is happening and is going to happen, even if it's complex. If cars can drive by themselves, not imaginable 3 years back, you think they can submit a form and make it look like, make it look like as if it came from, this is possible. And it's going to happen where you will go to one place and say,
I learned how to drive a car. I haven't learned how to control my information. So
We should
I'm not
talk
sure.
after the
I'm not sure of the premise.
Can we talk a little bit about what's next on the privacy legislation front? I mean, there's been a lot of talk about a national privacy law. Jim, I know you have some strong views on that. There's a lot of activity going on elsewhere in the world as well. I'd love to just get a view from each of you about what's
Simple
next
answer,
on that.
low chance of anything happening federally, high chance of CCPA #2 being enacted by referendum. And look at India or Brazil or, for that matter, China, which is a complicated case. But in a way, the US is becoming more of an outlier, certainly in the lack of federal legislation, which I don't think you see a chance of federal legislation.
0 this year. Under the Donald? No.
Well, and under gridlock generally.
Yeah, right, I agree. I just wanted to take a shot at Trump. No, there's 0 chance federal. I mean, look, we deal with these guys all the time. They have these long meetings. They go through the discussion about what the federal privacy law looks like. I'm like, this is never going to pass. We actually tell our advocacy staff, why would you waste your time lobbying over this when you know it's never going to get out of committee? So there's no chance there'll be a federal privacy law until 2021. But you will see I think the state of Washington, I mentioned this earlier, I think the state of Washington is likely to put forward a privacy law this year, a comprehensive privacy law that will somewhat undercut the CCPA, so we will oppose it. Because we look at the CCPA, a very imperfect law, as the floor off of which you should build, not the ceiling. But Washington has these two companies called Amazon and Microsoft, which have a big stake in this discussion, particularly Amazon, by the way, more than Microsoft. And so there may be a state law in Washington that becomes the sort. They tried to do it last year, and it was defeated.
Jim, just so everybody appreciates, I mean, most people do, of course, Microsoft supports comprehensive privacy legislation. Amazon supports it, Google supports it, probably Facebook supports it. But of course, they want the bills they're writing.
But what you mean by support is like what, the comment you made earlier about Facebook, like said you own your own data. That makes, they don't really believe that. They don't. And by the way, they continue to be the best friend we've ever had in passing privacy laws because they continue to do so many dumb things publicly no, this is completely correct. We could have never passed the CCPA had it not been for Cambridge Analytica. They are the gift, their political and public relations strategy is the gift that keeps on giving to advocates for privacy. And a ridiculous position, for example, on fake ads, right? Which is incredibly damaging to our democratic norms and institutions. Just helps cement their position as anti-public interest on so many things. So I do think, but I do think that you will see over time, at some point there's going to be a federal privacy law. It will not be under Donald Trump, but hopefully we will not have to deal with Donald Trump after, next week, but probably after November. But I do think that at some point it's insane that we don't have a federal privacy law. Europe, in my experience, which we worked on GDPR, and we have an office in London and do a lot in Brussels and London. First of all, they care more about privacy it's hard to describe Europe as a culture. It'd be like saying Asia is one culture. It's not. But the countries over there do care much more about it. And so we could have never passed the California law without GDPR and Cambridge Analytica. Those were the two things that drove us to pass the California law and gave us the shot. So I think Europe is going to really go after this. They're also going to go after Section 230 and some of the other issues that are really, to me, so thorny when you look at the impact of technology on all of our lives and on our democratic institutions. So Europe will move, and I don't know about China. Jim, I agree, it's such a complicated. But I could see India. Yep. I could see Australia and New Zealand. I could see Australia, New Zealand, India, and Brazil going big with this. It'll be incredible for your business. It'll be incredible for Common Sense's worldwide growth. But the U.S. is ironically, but the one thing I will say, if you're in Europe and you deal with the top legislatures, which we do, whether it's in Brussels or in the UK or Paris or wherever, the power's here. The power is all in the U.S. They know that. They always say that to you. When you deal with the prime minister of whatever country, they're like, but we don't have any real power. The real power is in the U.S., and Washington is so gridlocked and so dysfunctional right now that basically California is setting the standard for the United States. But I think it's going to change over the next few years.
One last question before we go to audience Q&A. What kinds of personal data are we not talking enough about?
Well, it's not only what kind of personal data we're not talking about, what kinds of uses. I think the privacy community, the privacy movement, got off on a wrong track with advertising. I think most people get the bargain. Free isn't free. It's free as advertising supported. At some level, I'm not that really troubled by advertising. Paper, electronic, TV, bugs me on TV, I guess, because it's hard to ignore, but
so
otherwise.
What is the right track, Jim?
So, employment, housing, credit, insurance. Now, all of those are covered by the Fair Credit Reporting Act, which has a right to access, a right to correct, a right to challenge. A lot of that data has crept out, and a lot of those uses have crept out under the guise of fraud prevention. And now, AI, of course, is taking all of this data and amplifying it. So it's, again, I see very little value, honestly. It's not that it's zero, but I wouldn't put my eggs in the basket of notice and consent, because we're all going to click yes, even if it's opt-in. We're already opting in. Facebook is 100% opt-in. Everybody has said, yes, I accept, I agree to everything they do, according to Facebook. And at some level, that's legitimate. But, so I would not even focus on opt-out, opt-in. I would focus on AI, automated sort of decision-making. Privacy is such a misleading word, after all, right? It's an umbrella term. It means a lot of things to a lot of different people. Think about fairness. Europeans used to use this concept, fair information practices. What is fair in using information to make decisions about people in ways that affect people? And that's where we're looking at the application of AI. And I think, if anything, the possibility there of inserting some rights in terms of transparency, accountability, the right to really challenge, the right sort of not to be judged and bucketed and categorized and ranked and rated unfairly. To me, that's where I would push the debate.
So I think that's very limiting, honestly, because that's not the only way you get. If technology and the use of data is going to control my behavior and the control of the behavior of my kids, regardless of how it is, it's not only about fairness. Certainly, it is a very important topic. I welcome you. Open your Google and search your own name, put my life next to it. You will see your birthday on it. And you know what that birthday is? You can call your bank and they'll give you access to it. It's about fraud. It's about identity. It's about my safety. It's about cybersecurity. Sure. I think it's very limiting to look at just like these 4 things, because if use of this data can be used to control one of my 3 kids, I'll be disgusted, right, with it. I'm sure everyone else would be, right? And I think that's really at the core of it.
That's fair.
Right?
That's good.
And that's why we keep calling. This is a fundamental human right.
I agree.
And people have to, give that right to the humans. And that's why, actually, frankly, we are so animated and so, it's a mission-driven business for us, right? That, create awareness for the consumers and enable companies to do the right thing. I think that's the way we actually believe it.
I completely agree with Rehan. And I do think it's a fundamental human right. I do not believe, I absolutely believe that opt-in should be this. I don't agree with Jim, what you said about that at all. I actually believe that if we established opt-in as the standard and made people understand that, it would have phenomenal change. But because Rehan is right, and Jim, you're saying this some too, is look, right now, you can manipulate and control not just kids' lives, adults' lives. And that is happening, by the way. And some of the people who are doing it are not my favorite people in the world and don't necessarily have values and value systems that I completely respect. And that's bled over into our democratic institutions. So I think we're at a really, really critical, that's why this is a great discussion. Because I think these are really fundamental issues that we all have to think. But if you think about it in the context of your children, there's no way you want to trust Mark Zuckerberg to manipulate your children's behavior. But that's exactly the situation that currently exists in our society. And so, and by the way, I don't say that, I'm going after Mark more than I potentially should, but it's because he's the head of the company that has most eviscerated privacy norms globally, and that continues to deny a lot of the behavior that they've done. And so this is a fundamental reckoning that I think we have to have as a society, that we have to have in our own communities. That's why I do think it is, which side of history do you want to be on? Because when you look out 20 or 30 years, the society that we live in is going to be significantly determined by how much we're able to regulate these extraordinary new business entities for the benefit of humankind and human rights and the public interest versus the short-term economic self-interest of the people who built those companies. So that to me is a fundamental and fascinating debate that we're in the second inning of, if it's a 9-inning game.
Let's go to questions.
Hello. So I represent a lot of big companies, so I have nothing bad to say about them. But an observation I've actually heard from one of these companies, which will remain nameless, GDPR, probably more than CCPA, because it's opt-in, does it not give big companies an advantage if they already have the direct-to-consumer relationship? And does that not create a barrier to entry to the smaller companies? And do these regulations not potentially work against us as consumers, which we'd want to have more choice, we want to have more competition, and from an antitrust perspective, you want to have competition, and some of these same antitrust regulators are also pushing for privacy regulation, which ends up cutting the other way. What are your thoughts on that?
You want me to add that? I'll give you an example. Let's say, and this is all hypothetical, right? Let's say you're Netflix. You know exactly what I watch. How much I replay a particular scene in a movie, they know that. Scary, right? Right? And you can go back and they'll show you exactly where you left the movie. Now, these rights actually give you to ask them to go delete it. Opt-in doesn't mean they don't have to honor your right. They also, if a startup comes along and say, you know what, give me all your, in some fashion, all your habits. I'm going to give you promotion a year free because I know what you then watch. In some ways, actually cracks open the market because data is not locked. If its portability is allowed, and it cracks open. I'll give you another example. In Australia, they're very focused on financial inclusion, and the banks have all the data. There's something called CDR, Consumer Data Rights. They actually focus on financials initially, which means that fintech and small enterprise can come, small startup can ask a bank to give the data to them, and then you can do financial services on them. So I don't think it's actually an impediment to startups. Actually, it cracks open the whole of the data because you actually have to give it by law. The data has to be portable. Opt-in is fine, but as long as there was a locked door. If it was a locked door, opt-in a locked door, you cannot ask for it back and to be deleted. I fully agree with the opt-in issue. But if I have actually a way to say, knock, knock, give me a copy and go delete it, there is a door. Now, the awareness is the issue. That's where I always come back to. Law doesn't mean everyone is aware of it, right? And if that awareness is somehow, I think, frankly, what common sense is going to do, and many, that's where awareness is going to come from. Yeah. And maybe, it has to come from more Hollywood, documentaries, movies, and all. I think that's where the consumer see it's my data. And then models can evolve where startups can come and ask for data, and I think that's the way.
But I think the other thing is, and look, we spent some time doing this too, although this is now in the hands of the AGs, basically, is you got to look at antitrust stuff, right? Europe's way ahead on this too. Margrethe Vestager is like the hero that we should all be grateful for, who's the #2 most powerful person in the EU now, a Danish woman who is the competition commissioner and who's been an incredible ally for us over in Europe. But she's taken on, yes, you're correct. You can't just have the privacy regime without also looking at the extraordinary antitrust and competition issues that have been swept under the rug. I mean, when was the last time there was any antitrust enforcement in the United States? 30 years ago? No. So you have to remember that the federal government essentially has been missing in action during the entire technological revolution of the last 30 years, has done almost nothing to protect anybody here or any of our kids or any of our society. They have just blown this completely. And so that is a very fundamental reality. And it's not just on privacy, it's on antitrust, it's on the 230, the safe harbor that they gave these guys who are the mass publishers of the world now but aren't treated as publishers. So you have to tie them all together, because yes, your point is very well taken, that unless you looked at some of the competition issues, they could use that to keep smaller startups out of business.
Next question.
Hello, John Kelly. We all know that technology is very dynamic, and that's partly how we got into this situation. It moves so fast that it outruns the pro-privacy institutions that we've had. If we flip it now and say, okay, are there any bleeding edge or future technologies that might have the opposite effect, that might actually increase our capacity to protect our privacy? And I'll just throw one out for your reaction, and that would be self-sovereign identity.
You should tell people what you define self-sovereign identity as.
Yeah.
Self-sovereign identity, right now your identity in your wallet, it usually comes from a government, like your driver's license, your birth certificate, or it comes from a corporation. You know, when you try to log on, it's like, well, what's your Facebook login? What's your Google login? You could have an identity that didn't come from either one of them. It's a digital locker, in effect, that is very private, and it's very hard to hack because every individual record in that locker is separately encrypted with a separate set of keys. Sounds pretty complicated, I know, but if you had this thing, even if only a small percentage of people had self-sovereign identity, one theory, one proposition is that it would begin to put pressure on the large corporations, because people would hear about it. They would hear, well, no, so-and-so doesn't have to do that. They're not giving up their right. They're on social media, but they don't have this thing that you guys are wanting me to sign off on. So, I think it's a possibility. I'm not saying it's a probability, but it's a possibility that, especially if elites decided that they wanted to have a self-sovereign identity, it might pressure corporations to change their privacy protection policies.
Rehan?
So, of course, one man's view. I don't think it's going to solve anything, and I'll tell you why. Because I think often personal information gets mixed with personal data. Your location is not personal information. When you tie it back to it, it's very valuable, right? So sovereign identity is going to perhaps give you a locker of the personal information itself sitting, and eventually you have to give a copy of it, because KYC, know your customer, is a competing requirement. That if your bank has to give you a service, they need to know you. It's a regulation. As soon as the copy goes there, you're already known. And all the trackers that go on all these browsers and all that, they don't need to know your identity. They just need to know your habits, right? They just need to know, because on the back end of it, like for instance, if I want to sign up to Facebook, they don't ask for my federal ID, right? I just sign up. They assume this is my identity and then start building persona around it, and then that gets used. So I think for certain scenarios, maybe it certainly is helpful, what you're suggesting. Of course, one man's view. But in general, for privacy side of things, I think it may not really solve, because there are 1,000 different ways to map things back to you, right? And 1,000 ways to actually sell your data and collect your data on the back end, right? And influence your behavior. And I think that's why I think probably it doesn't crack the problem.
Just one thought on that, which is, do you start from the outer edges and work your way in with different models, or do you try to affect the models and the practices of the big players? I honestly don't know what is the right answer, but you're proposing sort of an outside-in approach. A lot of people have talked about these other alternative models for a long time and tried to develop alternative business models. None of them has flown so far. They've all either crashed and burned, or they've pivoted to a different business model. I'm not saying it can't happen. I still think we need to focus more urgently, more immediately, more deeply on the existing big companies and the sort of existing big business models. And by the way, one thing that's associated with that is, I just don't think, in terms of what Rehan was just talking about, policymakers don't have a clue about the data flows. Now, that's not necessarily the knock that it sounds like on policymakers. Most of us don't have a clue about the data flows unless we're really into the industry.
Right.
And in terms of the way, and again, not to knock Facebook per se, but the way that any company, in the name of de-identified data, can still build this deep, broad, diverse profile about you by bringing in bits and pieces of data from different areas. And that's the thing that's been the sticking point on the antitrust regulators. I don't think any antitrust regulator in the world has yet gotten his or her head around sort of what is the actual business model and what are the economics behind this incredibly complicated data flow. So, I mean, that's a lot of sand in the air at some level, but we have to keep those things in mind.
Let's get a couple more questions.
Actually, sorry. So I have two comments. And again, my name is Simity, and I won't tell you who I work for because you guys have already mentioned the company, and I'm not here representing who I work for.
It shall stay private.
It will stay. So first question is, as you're talking about opt-in and opt-out, right? So customers have to understand the value of their data.
Right.
So not talking about Silicon Valley, where people like you and I know that our data is valuable. Most people don't understand the value of their data, right? Typically, when they go in and they sign up, they will opt in because if you go to Amazon, your package, you want to see, for example, if I'm sending a package to my son, I want to see what I sent to them last time. So, there is convenience there, and most people in this country don't understand that there is a value exchange going on. So I think the customers have to get educated, and it's going to take more than a Hollywood movie to do that. So, really, the second point is there's a whole ecosystem out there. And as you guys are talking about, I'm very familiar with AI ML models. I'm very familiar with connected devices, with cars taking you shopping. There are sites which can aggregate your data as a person, everything you're doing through your day, through your month, through your year, over years of data per person. So even if you can shame a lot of the larger companies, right, because they want to get customer trust. And they'll say, okay, so you can talk to Google, you can talk to Amazon, you can talk to Facebook, but unless the ecosystem buys into it, you will have enough people gathering data on you and I.
Yeah.
And I hate to say that to you, but you're hoping that we will have better federal regulation. You're hoping that we'll have a new president, but I think the chances of that are kind of limited.
Okay, so three things. One, I hope I'm right. Second, you're absolutely right about the critical importance of public education of consumers. So one of the big things, and I've talked to Rehan about this and a fair amount, and we believe this at Common Sense, and the scale of our reach helps us with that, and that's just going to get bigger and bigger. But there is going to have to, and that's why I said the winds at our back now. This is going to take years, but you're going to have to educate consumers about why this is valuable. One of the reasons why we wanted to run You Are the Product or Show Me the Money as a bill was not because we actually thought we could pass it. And by the way, occasionally we introduce legislation not thinking it's going to pass. We just want to educate the public. But by forcing the issue out there and having hearings about it, but that's a sophisticated public too that you're talking about. So educating the average person here and around the world about their rights and about the importance of this is going to take a while. And you're right about all the convenience factors and everything else that you mentioned. But I think that it's doable. I just think you have to take a long-term approach to it and realize that over time people are going to come to understand that. Young people in particular are going to come to understand that, who 5 years ago thought none of this mattered at all. So that's starting to change. And then I think that will be the predicate for what doesn't exist now, which is a much broader, thoughtful, societal approach to these issues. Because that's the other thing that's been lacking is there's been no societal approach to this. It's been completely run by the companies who are just doing what they can.
Do we have time for another question? Okay, great.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think what you said is pretty insightful in terms of consumer awareness.
Yep.
And I think it is also important to understand that it is not just few companies. There is thousands of. I mean, a retailer, big retailer that name shall stay private. They had the notion just before CCPA was coming out, I know it firsthand, that they would take all the videos and everything in the stores. They would look at what you're wearing. Of course, they will look at your face. They will try to, of course, figure out who you are because face recognition is possible, and look at what hat you wear. Is it Warriors hat? Do you have Nike shoes? And try to figure a model out of you to see how to uplift their basically thing. So it is not just as simple a thing. You look at Avast. Who do you think was buying on the back end the Avast data? The same companies who talk about trust, right? You can read the article. There's Microsoft and all the retailers. They're buying every click that you're doing through essentially a cybersecurity company's worth of data. So yeah, you're absolutely right. There's a whole back ecosystem over there, and I think consumer awareness first, but actually law, the right laws, right. Thoughtful laws, because it's not going to happen automatically. There has to be labeling laws came, and a lot of people start worrying about how much sugar I'm eating, and it takes time. But without that, it's just there's no chance. I think those things have to be so transparent. Ratings have to be so transparent. Common Sense Media doing ratings, it brings the things up, creates the awareness, and from there on, I think behavior hopefully will change.
Another question.
So I think you all sort of touched on data brokerage, but haven't really directly addressed it in a way, and I think that's probably part of the problem with both CCPA and proposed federal privacy legislation. It gets at the initial collection of data, but does not get at data brokerage. So under CCPA, there's a registration requirement under one of the amendments, but I think the downstream problem, unless there is legislation or other, I just don't think people have any clue. Avast is a good example, but it's much more widespread than that. Right. And I'm wondering how we get there, where it's not just people, there's an informed collection, but there's also some actual restrictions on what companies can do in terms of transferring data downstream.
Pass the law and enforce it, period. You're exactly right, Mark. And you have to pass the law, you have to write the law. We didn't get it. We couldn't put it under CCPA for various reasons that would take too long to explain, but part of the negotiation process with the companies that were going to support the legislation. But you have to write the law the way you just said, and then you have to have enforcement. So the other thing we haven't talked about is the enforcement issue, because that's my biggest concern now. Yeah. As the folks who authored, along with our friend Alistair, the CCPA, is we were always concerned about the enforcement issue because we bargained away the private right of action, right? We did, because that was the only way we get the law passed. And we did that with full knowledge of what we were doing, which meant that my law school classmate, Javier Becerra, would be in charge of enforcing the law with way too few resources. So one of the biggest things that is going to happen, in addition to passing intelligent laws that represent the broad public interest, is putting resources into enforcement. And that's one of the big issues right now. If you ask me the two issues we're going to try to do in California in 2020, it's going to be to do data use. It's to vastly expand the data use provisions of the CCPA. And to data minimization, meaning you can only use the data for the purpose you need it for in the business. You can't go in the brokerage route. And then second, you got to enforce the law. And you're going to have to, it can't just be shame, although sometimes we like shame because it's the only tool in the toolbox. But you're going to have to enforce, there are going to have to be resources to enforce the laws that are on the books.
Let me say, I agree with everything Jim said here on the enforcement, on data minimization. Mark, in response to your question, though, I really think we have to be realistic in terms of what we're thinking about here in terms of privacy. We live in the information age, and right now we've got this dominant advertising-based model, which is primarily where, I think, where the brokers come in, that plus fraud detection, and there's always going to be a fraud detection exemption to anything we do here. Fraud detection is going to be a permissible use. Yeah. And, you know, I don't know. I've painted myself into the role of the skeptic here, and I'll ride this horse till time is called. But, you know, if all that's happening is I'm getting this ad, and this ad is supposedly geared to me based upon all of this inferential stuff and all of this data collected through all these apps and these multiple applications, and it's all been compiled and it's shared and it's sold, and at the end of the day, I get an ad for shoes that I already bought or something I don't want. I just feel like we're getting worried about the wrong thing. And I actually think that at some level, consumers understand the advertising-based model. All these great things are free. Why are they free? They're free because we get ads. Maybe it's a convenience, maybe it's an annoyance. I don't buy the whole, a more meaningful user experience, and you know, we're making life better for you by showing you things that you really want. But I don't know. I'm just skeptical of the. I'm supposedly a privacy advocate, and I really am, but I just think we're barking up the wrong tree. But thank you. But we're barking up the wrong tree.
What ads did you see today?
If the concern is, what ads are you seeing, and that all of these people are driving, all these companies are driving themselves crazy, figuring out just what ad to give me.
I can assure you that's not my only concern.
I think,
But what is the right tree?
I think the Putin in Russia would disagree.
I said the.
Yeah.
Oh well, no. I mean, well then, I mean, absolutely.
Right.
No, I mean, we're assuming that we're still, land of the free, home of the brave. But, yeah, absolutely. I mean, all of this. You're right. You're 100%. All of this technology is obviously being deployed in the most massive control surveillance system ever imaginable. Absolutely.
If the ad was such innocent thing, I would fully agree with you. Like, okay, show me the ad. Like, I enjoy ads sometimes, right? But if it is, what it says that whoever has more money can throw it at you and change your behavior.
Well, now that's a good point.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
if they can change my behavior,
Absolutely.
to even vote in a different way, or put me in an echo chamber, or have a racial bias,
Absolutely.
or actually have.
Absolutely.
This is very
So those
dangerous.
are the things. Those are the things I want to focus on.
Yeah. And I think those are highly interlinked.
That's where I want to focus on, not so much the data collection and flow, but some of these usage questions. Although I agree with Jim 100%, data minimization, I mean, that's one of the forgotten elements of the privacy framework.
Huge.
Yeah, I have a comment and a question for you guys. One of the things about European data protection law that I've thought for a long time is that it stems from a general hostility to the processing of personal information about individuals. And when you look at US data privacy law, having developed over many decades, generally sector to sector, it's been as a result of a consensus with respect to processing in particular areas like the Fair Credit Reporting Act or financial information or whatnot, where it is relatively easy to articulate in those areas how data can be abused. And I think one of the challenges that we face now, and going back to your point, is how you articulate to the middle of the country that doesn't necessarily approach things and view things the way that we do. But if you want to have a national consensus about the way to approach things, we have a lot of work to do in terms of articulating that to them, because I know that a lot of people that I associate with from the middle of the country, they just look at it in a really different way. Like, almost, I think of it in simplistic terms as like, I talk to some of my European colleagues, the way that they describe privacy is really different.
Yeah.
So I think one of the challenges for advocacy groups and challenges from policy is that a lot, we think in terms of general privacy regulation, but we're really talking about a number of different use cases that present different problems, whether it's ad tech or just general personal data.
I'll just add one more comment. I think if you just look at humans, highly influenceable. You show me a bunch of things 5 times, my brain is going to wire in a certain way, and I'm going to believe in it. And you throw more at it, I'm going to go further in one direction. And I think if money can buy that, that's very dangerous. And I think it's only possible if you know me, precisely know me, to give me exactly what you want, right? I think that's what at stake. It's not just monetization models. And we are seeing that impact of that happening all over in the Facebook side.
And earlier you brought up the security issue, both our own personal security, security of our kids. So again, that's where I think, the manipulation factor, both democratic as well as just in our preferences and our personal lives and our attention capture, the safety issues, the fairness. I think we have to disaggregate some of those and start thinking in terms of what are those solutions.
Absolutely.
And Mike, you're right. I mean, by the way, we've been great for your business by passing all these laws. You should write a check to common sense. But anyway, no, we put lawyers in business for the next 20 years on the privacy issue. But I think you're actually right. I think making the case to people about why it's important in their daily lives and why it's important to their kids, and not getting it caught up too much in sort of the jargon, if you will, of data minimization, or however you want to. So I think we have a long way to go. I think, look, part of it is that we've had these extraordinary changes in our lives at warp speed, driven by some of the most innovative and successful companies in the history of the planet. And government completely asleep at the switch. So there was no broad public thing. So it literally fell to small public interest organizations and emerging spokespeople, because a lot of times it's just individuals who start to raise the issues. So, but you have to make it, I agree with you, you have to make it clear to people why this really matters to their own life and why it isn't just about some shopping choice they're gonna make here or there. And we're not there yet. We're not there yet, but I think you're raising a very important question. And to me, running a large nonprofit that does this, among other things, that public education aspect is going to be critical. And some of the stuff that Rehan is doing in his new company, I think, is critical for this too. So it's a long-term effort, but I think it's a great question, Mike.
We've got time for 2 more questions. Omar?
So my question is, if Cambridge Analytica was a watershed moment in raising consciousness and for legal stuff, looking ahead to later this year, what do you think the 2020 election is going to do for privacy and consciousness raising in this country? And what's the prediction?
Well, when my brother's president, his first act, no.
No pitching, Jim.
It's not a pretty picture. Unfortunately, the way that the Russian manipulation played out, and in a way, I put the Russian manipulation, of which obviously Cambridge Analytica was a piece. I put that in its own unique bucket. And the way it played out, obviously, the person who won has now had to deny that it happened, and his party is lining up to deny that it happened. So, you know, the Russians are at it again. They never stopped. I think until we get a Republican willing to say the Russians succeeded in 2016, I don't think we're going to have a solution, a U.S. national solution to the propaganda, democratic political influence side of things. I just don't. I think, you know, unfortunately.
There are so many ways to influence. It's, you know, you throw money at it, and there's so many platforms to influence you. And you don't have to spend too much money. I mean, literally, not like billions of dollars, maybe millions of dollars you can influence. I think, and Russians have enough money on that, and they have all the way, and they are good at it. I can tell you they are very good at it. In cybersecurity, cyber hacking, understanding behavior, they're very, very good at it, and I think they're at it.
That's cheery.
No, I mean,
sorry to be a downer.
But I actually think wearing my poli-sci law professor hat, not common sense, this is the most dangerous time in my lifetime, no question, in terms of our democracy and our institutions, largely because of Trump and his behavior and the collapse of one of the parties in the country. So that's my own personal opinion, not Common Sense Media's opinion. I'm serious. And that's very important because one of the reasons we're successful is we're nonpartisan. But speaking as an individual and as a professor, I think that our democracy has not been at this level of risk since the U.S. Civil War. And I don't think I'm overstating that at all. And I think the implications of it are phenomenal. And I think that all of us need to take stock of that, not just because of our lives, because I look around and most of us have spent. I'm thinking about our kids and our grandkids. But this is the most dangerous in my lifetime. Nothing like this. This makes Vietnam and Watergate look like a walk in the woods in terms of the real implications for our society. And the role of not just the political players that I mentioned, but the role of the companies that are involved. To me, Facebook's behavior during this is absolutely unconscionable. And which side of history that they're going to be on? Are you kidding me? When people look back and really take stock of what happened, and the continuing fatuous denials of what's gone on, mind-boggling to me. This is not minor league stuff. So I actually think this is, I hate to say it, the most important election in my lifetime. Because if we go with the current crop, we are in deep shit. And our kids are really in bad shape. Sorry for my French.
All right, I'm
So
totally...
my question is, why do you think, if you think, consumers actually care? So I'm Dan Brown. I'm with the McDermott Law Firm as well. And my perspective is I lived and worked in London for 5 years. My experience is the UK in general, EU in general, they do not care who has their data as long as it's not breached. Otherwise, they want to focus on convenience. And that, I believe, at least anecdotally, has been borne out with the GDPR. I was in London last week. All my clients are insurance companies and insurance brokers who have very personal data. They know the value of that data. Boardroom after boardroom after boardroom said, consumers have voted with their feet. They do not care. Yes, they have these new rights, and our business continues as usual because, yeah, they have the right to delete, they have the right to opt out, whatever. They just don't. And as individuals, too, these were, the legal teams at these insurance companies say, yeah, I got all of these notices. I just delete or accept because it's fine as long as it's not breached. I did not follow up about children. I assume different with children. But again, in California, I just want to know why you think consumers will care and respond. Like you said, it's great for law firms. Awesome. But other than that, I don't know.
Yeah.
So what do you think, panelists?
So I think that's frankly, consumers are fickle, right? And how they behave, what incidents happen between now and then, I think will dictate it, what happens in elections. But I think the more important part is actually simply awareness. And how difficult it is, you gave the example, which is spot on. Try doing it, going to Amazon. People are not everyone is a techie to actually do it. So I think two things. One is, of course, knowledge and understanding and how easy it is. Question is, can this be so easy and can this actually have some other benefits, which is the monetization models, that consumers start hearing about it, and it needs to be seen. I think it's kind of it has to be seen. There's a projection to say, look, if education and incidents happen and there's monetization model, maybe consumers care about it. But your point is very valid. Without education, awareness, and other models, and making it super convenient for consumers to exercise their right at a broad level, not just going in one places, it can swing. But of course, you're absolutely right. It's to be seen.
I think there's a theme here, because I'm going to agree with Dan on this part over here. I think that I keep hearing from the panel, hey, we have to have people who care, we have to educate them and things like that. And I'd say a couple comments on this. One, even on the panels, we talk a lot about the data that's collected. I think there's a discrete lack of imagination of how that data is used. I think that maybe is more we should be focusing on. And to everyone's, if it's just getting ads, to me, people don't care. If it's, do I get admitted to a university? Am I admitted to, do I get my immigration status? What am I paying for insurance? So I think certainly that'll help. But even with that, because I'm guessing a lot of people in this audience know, so CCPA has been in effect for almost a month. How many of you have opted out or deleted your data or said do not sell for more than 5 organizations? Okay, so 2 panels, more than 5. Okay, and even for a data broker like Experian or things like that? A couple. I mean, did you upload your selfie?
Yeah.
Okay, so if this audience, we had what, 15, 20% maybe. These are people who came here out of their busy day, are spending, I don't know how much to attend and whatnot. You really think that, Joe who's slinging burritos at Chipotle down here, or the guy who's harvesting lettuce, or the PG&E line workers, you think they are going to suddenly care? I challenge you, if this is really what it's going to take, we're screwed.
Yeah.
And I'd also say, just to put a little hope on this, we talked about antitrust. I'd agree with you, too. If I had to rely on the common citizen understanding the rent-seeking behavior of Facebook and Google and how much companies are paying for advertising, like you're talking about $1,000 a lead or whatever it is, there's a huge amount of what's going into the products that you build or the services you build. They're being sucked up by some of the large companies in the Bay Area. If we had to rely on the popular vote to have antitrust action, we would also be screwed. So let me just say, educating and having people suddenly care about this little pet thing, and it's a pet thing to people in this room, but when you walk out of this room, it is not their pet. We have to think bigger, or different, not bigger. We have to think differently. I think we really need to challenge the way we're approaching this problem.
What's your suggestion? By the way, it's good thinking. What's your suggestion? What's the other way of approaching it?
So I didn't come here. You're the panelist, not me.
No, I mean, look, this is.
First of all,
Look, you have a view on it. So,
yeah, so,
you
so
have
I
a view
think
on it.
I think we have to get much simpler in the way we're thinking about our law. So I was really excited about CCPA until I tried to use it. I thought, oh my God, like I have the tinfoil hat on like you guys over here, and like I want to do this. And then I was like, this is actually a pain in the ass. So then I went down the, oh, I could write a service that's going to automate all this. Oh, there's 2 modes that companies can choose to accept my privacy inquisition. And if I want to have a third party do it, well, that's a whole nother breach of a whole nother set of issues that go with that. And there's some actually really good reasons why you don't want to have a third party. Because if I'm requesting a copy of my data from someone who's got intimate data on me, yeah, I want them to validate that it's actually me and not someone else. So there's some legitimate reasons why you need to be careful here. So I think complex laws like this don't actually help. I think that let us feel pretty good. And again, I was really excited about it, and I don't mean to be Debbie Downer here or Chicken Little, but I wonder if we're doing a little bit more of a disservice. So I think we maybe just need some really, really simple laws that prevent either some collection or use or transmit of data. I understand this is difficult because our pygmy brains are really focused on more physical assets, and we think, oh, I own. The same conversation happened here, whether you own or lease or sell, whatever. We have trouble just getting our commentary here right, and we think of it as a physical object. But to your point, data is easily copied and transmitted. Yeah. And so we need to get a lot more, I think we just need to get simpler, just cut back down to really, really basic and simple things that are difficult to wordsmith around. Yeah. I guess that would be my suggestion. And I'm not a lawyer, unlike many people in the room here. And so I'm not going to write a law around this, but that would be my directional first take.
So at this point, I'm actually going to ask the panelists to go to wrap-up remarks, and we should address this, whether we should go to a simpler legal framework, and just what, is it hopeless?
Well, I think landing something on the Mars in one shot in a privacy era, I think that's just not possible. These are steps along the way. I think I do agree. You take one step, you learn what's not going to work, and this is going to happen like in 1 year. It's a journey. Are we directionally with this law actually in the right direction? Absolutely yes, because this is a problem. Does it solve? Is it perfect? Absolutely not. We're all acknowledging it. Does consumers actually care? Of course, actually not only care, how easy it is. If the law actually had that, it mandated that you won't have selfie and all that, perhaps it was simpler. And making those services which actually can do things on your behalf after verifying that you are you, and then things do on your behalf, perhaps that's the next version of the law is going to come. To your point, you have to make it easy, which I fully agree with, for the consumer that they don't have to do much. They have to simply exercise their rights. And even there, what is the incentive is the point there. But I think directionally, this is a new era of privacy because of what's going on. And directionally, I think we're in the right direction, and it's going to be a journey. Right. We'll be on it.
Jim Dempsey, closing remarks.
100% agree we need to make it simple. But we're never going to make it simple enough for the average consumer. I think we need to completely break away from, we all got trapped, consumer advocates, user control, user empowerment, give the individual control. Forget about it, because they're not going to exercise it. Now, we say policymakers don't keep up. The Supreme Court, actually, believe it or not, has done a pretty good job. And they came up with a simple solution. On location tracking, get a warrant. That's the gold standard under the Constitution. Get a warrant. I think a simple law, here's a law that would work. If you collect location information for a mapping service, use it for the mapping service, 0 reuse, resell, redisclosure of location information, period. No opt-in, no notice, no consumer education. You collect the data, you use it for the purpose of providing the location-based service, period. It's a radical solution. It would shut down, or at least it would cut off one stream of the profiling data. But simple, yes. Targeted, yes. Dependent upon consumer choice and understanding and control, no.
Jim Steyer.
So Jim,
I agree on the simplicity, completely agree on the simplicity point. And I would also say I'm honored to be with such intelligent panelists and a very good moderator. My other 2 points I would tell you or 3 points are this. Think big, be patient, be persistent. It took us about 25 years to get where we are right now, and all the power was in the hands of industry. So it may take us another 20 years to get back to equilibrium, but it's moving in the right direction. And I think we have to think big. I think we have to simplify. And I think you guys it's a very well-informed audience. So other than making sure we get rid of Donald Trump, I would just say be patient and persistent on everything. That one I would not be very patient and persistent. I'd be persistent but not patient about. But thank you very much for having us.
I want to thank Jim and Rehan and Jim for such a thoughtful discussion about what's next and what's working and what's not, and for the audience for their thoughtful comments and questions. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. We too would like to thank you, Jim, Rehan, Jim, and Pui-Wing. Thank you so much for sharing your perspectives ever so candidly. We really appreciate it. You've been a wonderful audience. A recording of this video will be posted on our YouTube channel shortly. We hope that you will access that, share it, and find our channel in general to be a useful resource. Have a safe evening. Good night. Oh, we actually have a little present that we're going to present right now. It's the Churchill Club speaker T-shirt. Thank you. Good night.